first question that the panel will be discussing, and I'm going to nominate a person to start each discussion. They don't know who that person is going to be. So I shall encourage them to take a deep breath at the end before their name is mentioned. I think it's a very good question. It has a short answer, and it is talk briefly about one significant clue that you missed on first reading either the Lyman Chronicles or the House of Nicola. One significant clue, and they've had a chance to think about which one they want to mention. And I'm going to ask Sandra to speak first.
Thank you. Am I? Yes, well, as my children will say, I'm generally oblivious to everything. And so you can imagine that Dorothy Dunnett caused me a lot of problems. But I would say probably the significant clue is Julius. Is that the other books you find out maybe by the end of the book, like about Gabriel, you find out earlier in the book. But Julius, it did send me back to books to look at him and see his sort of like shallow side, opportunistic side, him stroking the silk of his knee because he liked good things, and starting to realise that the clues were laid there right from the very, very beginning, that he was somebody to watch. So I would have said Julius was my pick.
Thank you very much. Simon.
Well, I can't really count the number of missing significant clues for me. There are so many. The one I'll mention, and I just point out the first time I read Game of Kings, I was ill. But I missed the fact that Christian Stewart was a woman. So there was this character called Christian. Many people I'd ever heard of before called Christian men, Christian X of Denmark and the like. So it took me a while to cotton on to the fact that Christian Stewart was indeed a woman.
Love it. Thank you very much. Linda.
Well, I read Ringed Castle first, so nothing in the first Lyman books until Ringed Castle was a surprise. Every so often I'd read something and I'd say, oh, that's why they didn't want him to be with Christopher in Russia, because there was this rumour about him with boys, etc., etc. Different with Niccolo, and Julius again is one. I had a few little twinges about Julius, but then I had a few twinges about Tobier as well. It's when Julius realises that he can no longer control Nicholas. And there are other little clues. She calls him a man with sly good looks that women like, and she puts the word sly in, and that is a clue. And finally, when Catherine is with Doria, and he realises that one of his ambitions was, you realise that one of his ambitions was to either marry Tilde or Catherine and take over the company, and he can't do that anymore. And then later in the series, I could do it with Jodie and Bon. There are clues all the way through with Julius.
Thank you very much. Second question, another one that I think is a promising one near the beginning of our discussion. Is there one mystery, in quotation marks, above all in the books that is never resolved to your satisfaction? Is there one mystery above all that is never resolved to your satisfaction? Simon?
Well, I don't think this is a mystery in one way. It's not like what have happened to the gold and all that kind of stuff, which I couldn't really have given a monkey's about. But it's why on earth Catalina seems to have rewritten the history of her relationship with Klaus during the first book. At the end of the first book, she's turned against him and remains against him, even though, as far as I can tell, it was she that was the initiator and encourager of the relationship, and I never really understood that.
Thank you very much. Linda?
I never really understood why all of Nicholas's friends were so horrified that Simon's wife's child was his, that they were going into some sort of meltdown about incest and that he'd done it on purpose. She wasn't married to Simon when he slept with her. There was no suggestion that she was going to. She'd already said that she didn't like him and she wasn't going to marry him and she didn't want to. So I couldn't understand why they have this hatred almost of him, that he has done something so wrong, when, if you think about it logically, Simon's actually the one that's committing incest if he's slept with his son's girlfriend.
Thank you. Sandra.
Right, okay. When we were sent this question, I didn't put down that it had to be within the books. So I'm going to sort of like have several bites of cherry here. So the first two things I put down, which are not in the books, and it's because they're not in the books, is I would have loved an 8th Johnson Johnson book. I would have loved to have seen what actually happened with that denouement. I would have loved to have seen whether he reconciled with his wife or didn't. And the other one is I would have loved her to have written up her research on Macbeth, of the Macbeth-Thorfinn relationship. Going back to the real question that Julia's just enhanced, I think probably it's Bond's real parentage. The which child is which has been settled to my mind, but I know that it hasn't been settled universally. So that one is perennial cause of debate, but I feel as though I know the answer to that one. But so I think probably what Bond's real parentage is, where she comes in, and the fact that obviously her lineage probably continues down the line into the next series. So.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I didn't make meaning clear. I'm awfully glad I didn't, because I liked your answer and wouldn't have had it if I'd made my meaning clear. And you had read the question. For anybody who's sort of out of touch with common parlance, the which child question refers to whether it is Khaireddin or Kudum who is the son of Francis Crawford of Lymond. That is the question that she was referring to, and it's been ongoing now for 50, 60, I don't know how many years. Anyway, a long time. I was going to say, if there's anybody who wants to expand on that, please do.
I have a mystery that is actually not a real one. I've made it up, if you like. But I always had this lovely private theory that Lymond is Margaret Lennox's son, Darnley's father. The dates fit. Solway Moss was 42. He was with Margaret Lennox for a couple of years before they bunged him off to the galleys. Darnley is born in 1545. And throughout the books, you do get little sort of, not hints as such, but when he says to Matthew, I can call you Cuckold, well, Cuckold in those days meant that you had fathered a child on someone else's wife. So my private, I want this to be true, I want Lymond to be Darnley's father, I've always thought that.
Thank you. Yes, it has crossed more than one mind here, I think. Would either of the other two like to comment on that?
I think somebody had a look at that. There was a very detailed backstory in the archive that gave much more detailed dates of like when Lymond was in the galleys and all that kind of stuff. I think somebody looked at that and said it wasn't possible, but I've not double-checked it myself, and I quite like it as a theory. I mean, it does explain Margaret's absolute loathing of him, I think.
Also, Darnley is blonde and beautiful.
Thank you very much. The next one is an interesting one, which I hope will prove controversial. Do you think any of Dunnett's characters are underwritten? If so, pick one to talk about and give reasons. I should say at this point that if this afternoon, and we have a slightly longer session which is open to everybody, if you want to pick up on any of the questions we've already handled, you will have the chance to do that. And I'll remind you of that later. This might be one you'd like to think about before we launch into it. So, do you think, panel, that any of Dunnett's characters are underwritten? Linda?
Well, I chose two, so I'm going to do an eeny meeny, and it will be from Niccolo, and it's Goro. He shows true loyalty, intelligence, empathy, but again, he doesn't feel rounded enough. We know bits about him, and he pops up from time to time, but he's not always there, and you don't get the feeling he's always saying what he thinks. I wanted more of Goro.
Thank you very much. Sandra?
I found this question quite a difficult one, really. And thank you, Linda, because that makes me think that actually there's an awful lot of the characters that are in Niccolo who are not fully rounded. They pop up and they disappear and they pop up again. So thank you for that. I hadn't really thought about it. I think one of the problems is some people think Marta is underwritten, but that is actually probably the nature of the beast that Dorothy was writing, to actually have... You couldn't give too much away about her without giving away all of the secrets and the things that she actually held. So some of it is part of Dorothy's writing style, but now that Linda's raised my mind about that, I do think that the characters in the Nico Rising series, House of Nico series, are more, they're here, they're gone, they're back again, they appear again, and it is more difficult to get hold of them as characters.
Thank you. Simon?
I think there's an interesting contrast between characters that are underwritten, i.e. in some ways not enough is explained about them to make either their character or the plot make sense, and those characters about which we just want to know so much more, but the author has not chosen to tell us. In the Lyman Chronicles, there are characters who disappear. Margaret Beaton, for example, who I thought was a great character, and then suddenly you never hear from her in the last 3 books. But as regards the characters underwritten, I jotted down 5 without much difficulty. I would say the one that I'm going to mention is actually Niccolo, in that I felt that Dunnett was doing so much to try and obscure his motivations and his character, basically playing war games with her readers, that by the time we got to the end of the series, not quite the end of the series, but by the time we got to, I guess, Caprice and Rondo and the other later books, I really lost a sense of who he was. He didn't seem to be kind of the same person. It's resolved by the end of Gemini, but I lost sympathy, I think, with him because of that.
Thank you very much. Can we ask who the other 4 were?
The other 4, Godskulk and his inexplicable religious fervour, Salablanca, who just isn't very much written about, he's just sort of there, Margot, and Fat Father Jordan and his sudden horror of, or apparently sudden horror of homosexuality that seems to me to make its first real, genuine appearance in Gemini as an explanation. I mean, it's referred to earlier, but not greatly.
Carry on.
My other one was Danny. I wanted more of Danny, more of his backstory. He's lovely. I really, really like him, like Goro, and I wanted him to be there more. And he just sort of, like Goro, he pops up and fizzles out and doesn't fulfill what I think is his potential.
Sandra, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to address something that Simon said, when I was looking in the archives, there is some... Obviously, Dorothy was writing quite a lot of backstory, or not backstory, but doing character sketches. And it comes across that with Nicholas, he starts out as actually being happy-go-lucky, no defunks, nothing intricate really about him. And it's as the series goes on that he becomes more and more complex and with hidden depths and everything like that. But he was quite happy to skim along on the surface of life, it appears. And maybe that's why he's different, that you found him different.
I would say no, because we find out in Niccolo Rising that he's far more complex than we think, and he's been corresponding with a Dauphin and all that kind of stuff going on. So that's not really it. It's I don't know. It's just his motivations, and it's difficult to say. Just a sense of who he is. So it changes. So I thought I'd got a very good grasp on him by the end of Niccolo Rising. By the time we get to, for example, Unicorn Hunt or To Lie with Lions, he's now just like a person that does stuff. I don't know. Difficult to explain.
I think maybe you mean he suddenly starts acting out of character. That he almost like he has a personality swap. He does things you don't expect.
It's a long, slow drift, I would say. I've felt through each book, probably after Race of Scorpions, I would think we get to know. Actually, no, after Scales of Gold. Because Scales of Gold, with the relationship with Chelis, I thought I got him back. a bit, and then after that it just drifts and drifts and drifts.
I think this afternoon, one or two people who are here might have something to say about Nicholas. Would be brilliant. If you are a Nicholas fan, and I'm not looking at anybody, and I do know one or two, please do prepare your comments when you have the opportunity later on. Thank you very much. And I do agree about Skulk. I never understood why he does what he does. He'd read the memo, but that was about it. Well, thank you very much indeed, panel. And the next one is great. I hope it'll be great fun anyway. And if you want to mention some later that you've chosen, please feel free to do so. It's this. Of the many set pieces in the books, which one is your favourite and why? And I'm going to ask Sandra to start on one.
Thank you. Tribules, the race through Leon, I think is my favourite because of everything that comes out of it. You've got the excitement, you've got the fact that Philippa and Lyman are as equals in that escapade, and then you've got sort of like Philippa's realisation and everything, so I just found that. But then you could go on and sort of like say there's so many others, it's very, very difficult to pick them, but yeah, for today, it's going through Leon and the Tribules.
Thank you very much. Simon.
I'm not very good at following through on the set pieces and understanding what's going on. It reminds me a bit of the Battle of Helm's Deep in The Lord of the Rings, where I read that. I must have read that book, I don't know, 10 or a dozen times. I never understood that until I saw the movies. So maybe I'm just not that bright in the area. But in fact, the one that I picked was in fact the Leon. The same as Sandra, largely because I more or less followed what was going on, and also the bit at the end where that talk about was it single-threaded happiness of Philippa as an only child, and then how she's sort of now feels part of a greater thing after that race. So yeah, that was my pick.
Thank you, Linda.
One of my favourites is when the Russia Company are presented to the Tsar at the banquet, and they ride through the town, and they're in gifted gowns, velvet and golden ermine, and then they walk through the Kremlin gate, and they walk through room after magnificent room, and reach the banqueting hall, and some of them are presented, and then in the evening they go to dinner, and the two comments that are made, I think one turns and says, "It's Oriental." No, it's Tartar. And the dinner lasts hours and hours and hours with loads and loads of booze, and the Tsar just sending down crumbs from his own plate, a bit of each here, a bit of bread here, and then they're gifted with the gold plates afterwards, and when they get home, they have to give the gowns back, which it then takes you to the dinner that Osep goes to in London, where he is lauded through the streets in his gowns, which he keeps, and the dinner is just like an ordinary dinner, and he can't understand what's going on because they're all eating at the same time, and the royals are up there eating the same stuff at the same time, and he's so perplexed because it's not Tartar.
Thank you very much, yes. If I were answering this question, and since I'm not, I feel I've got the freedom to say this, if I were asking the question, I'd probably do what you've done, but I think some of the best set pieces in Dunnett are actually in the Johnson Johnson books. If you haven't read them, you might find some set pieces to remember in those. And this harks back a little bit to what was said earlier about Margaret Lennox and why, particularly, she might have it in for Lyman. Who in the books do you think is truly evil? Who in books do you think is truly evil? And I think I'll start with you, Simon, please.
Well, I think that's quite a high bar to clear. And I only have one person I think is truly evil, and that, of course, is Gabriel. He seems to absolutely delight in hurting other people. And I think that's probably my definition of evil. Margaret Lennox has a little bit of evil on the side, in that she delights in hurting Lyman, I would say, but we don't see it really. She also a bit Philippa. It doesn't seem to be a defining trait of her character. So she dabbles, I would say. So that's my definition, is someone delights in hurting other. Now, the other, not evil, but the other name I want to bring forward is somebody who doesn't really care about the feelings of others, and that's Piero Strozzi, who is a troublemaker and a stirrer and doesn't care at all what the fallout of his actions are, as long as it does affect his particular friends. So he's a large actor in setting up the whole tragedy at the end of Checkmate and the near death of our hero. So there we are.
Thank you, Simon. Sandra?
Yes, I plumped for Gabriel as well. I think he's a narcissist, well, however you say it. He's just totally absorbed in himself. He's a psychopath, basically. The only time that I could remember that he loses control, you know, even when his sister is killed in front of him, is actually when his death is coming for him, and it's going to affect him. And just interestingly, when Dorothy was asked about this in 1990, she actually said, she referred to Gabriel as being truly evil, who are without conscience, because that is the way that they're brought up, the way and the way that events. So she actually picked out Gabriel as being the person. She found it very, very hard to write about evil people, but that was the one she picked.
Thank you very much. Linda?
In the Spring of the Ram, Marion says... in the Spring of the Ram, Marion says, Nicholas cannot understand evil. He's learnt nothing. Through beatings and injury, he will not think evil of Simon. And I did my thing of skim reading all the way through really quickly, picking out the word evil. It appears hundreds of times in Niccolo, hardly ever in Lymond. And I looked up on my thesaurus the definitions for evil: malevolence, bad intent, resentment, cruelty, malice, harmful, cursed, and cruel in failure, which was quite interesting. So obviously it is Gabriel. He's got no redeeming characteristics. The one thing people used to say about him was his religion and his love for his sister. Well, he didn't care two hoots for religion, and he owned his sister. She was an obsession to be used. And I think he is really, truly evil from beginning to end. Nothing redeemed him.
Thank you. Simon already referred to Tolkien, and I think it's probably Gabriel who would have died as Saruman dies and have dissolved into horrible stuff at the end. He has not a drop of goodness in him. But thank you very much, everybody, for dealing with that. And to the next one. Now, obviously, you're free to comment on that later on yourselves. And this is a huge topic, and I'm sure everybody will want to contribute to it later, and you may feel you don't have time now to do so, but it's this. The links between the Lymond Chronicles and the House of Niccolo. Are there any that you specially appreciate, and are there any you could happily do without? Now, the person who put this question forward, at rather greater length than that, emphasized that they were not thinking only of the sort of what have been referred to as the radio-free Lymond moments of Nicholas. But any kind of thematic links or recurring thoughts or whatever that come up in both those series. So really it's fairly open field, but the focus of this question is the links that you could find between the Lymond Chronicles and the House of Niccolo, which you might specially appreciate, and are there any you'd rather want there at all? And I think I'm going to ask Simon to start this one.
Well, none. I would say, on the whole, I really wish the two books, the two series hadn't. Now, I really wish the two series hadn't been linked. Now, back in the 1990s, when a lot of us were very active on the Dunnett work email lists, and we're all speculating like crazy what the outcome is going to be and how the series are going to be linked. It was enormous fun to speculate on that, and many, probably thousands of emails were exchanged on that topic, but I don't think it did any favours to the House of Niccolo series at all. But if I'm going to mention, given Julia's just clarified into the wider thematic thing, the future of Scotland, I think, appears in both books, and interestingly, the one that Dunnett wrote earlier in her life, show, partly because of the historic period, shows Scotland's destiny as being increasingly entwined with England. And the one that she wrote later in her life is about Scotland really making sure that it is an independent European nation. And so I think possibly you can read things into that if you wish, but generally none.
Thank you. Linda.
My favourite link between the two is music. It's the emotional effect that music has on both Diamond and Niccolo. At times of great happiness, times of great stress. Niccolo's response to the music when he's in Trebizond and he hears the music coming from the cathedral is fired up because he is so angry about Catherine, and he's already on an emotional high. And then the music overwhelms him in the same way that Jodie gets overwhelmed by Rosalind, and Lyman can't listen to music because it just reminds him too much of the past. Music that he wanted to play when his father wouldn't let him and smash his lute. The music that he plays for Christian. The links between music, I think, are beautiful. The one that I can do without is especially when Nicholas says, "I saw a dead child." And I thought, you don't need that. I didn't like it. It didn't fit. And I wish she hadn't done it.
Thank you very much. Sandra.
So maybe it's a romantic in me, but I liked the deep relationship that ended up maybe at the end of the books, maybe a bit earlier, between the husband and wife. I really liked that. Also liked the powerful women that were there, the way that she wrote those. So she had a male hero because he could be in battles and things like that, but behind him there was a phalanx of women, you know, and I thought those were really, really well done. Linda mentioning music, I would say ships as well, and the love of sailing and what the sea does is in absolutely every single book, the Johnson books, Torfin as well, and all of them. So that's a very powerful link as well.
Yes, that of course is one that I was thinking about when I chose Portsmouth as our venue, and our next talk rather reminds us that the sea is at the heart of almost everything that Dunnett wrote. Thank you very much indeed. Now this is the last scheduled question for this session, and again it's one that can be developed later or not as people wish. Thinking about Dorothy Dunnett's masterly use of actual historical characters or events or situations, which ones stand out for you for positive or negative reasons? So her use of actual history, characters, events, situations, which stand out either because you like them or because you don't. Sandra.
The Torfin Macbeth link, I'm fascinated by that, which was a lot of work that she'd done. I would, as I've mentioned before, love to have seen that. Ansel and Madonna's relationship with Scotland, I thought that was really well done. She got lost in that in a way. But the web of relationships, all of the relationships across the whole of Europe, commercial, personal, everything like that, I thought she was able to describe those and bring them together in a way that, you know, you to delve into them. So those, and they're all positive. I can't really think of a negative way that she used sort of like the historical events or characters. So.
Thank you. Linda?
Negative would be Margaret Lennox. So you know, she's one of my pet likes, and I don't think that... I love the character in the book, but I don't think that's my Margaret Lennox, so I think she did her a disservice. My absolute favourite is Chancellor. You know him, you like him, you respect him, and the death of Chancellor and his son is written in such a quiet, unemotional, there's no melodrama, and it moves you every single time. It's truly sad and beautiful all at once. And I think she didn't know Chancellor, she didn't know what his character was like, and I hope that he was like that, because he is a wonderful man.
Yes, fascinating example of the father-son relationship, but I think our next speaker is going to disagree with you, if he even comments on it. Simon?
Well, so very, very, very many. I mean, there's just, she was an absolute master mixing real history with fictional characters. I can't think of anybody who ever does that any better than her. But I'll pick a few. The Allen plot, Niccolo Rising, all completely new to me. I didn't even know about the whole dying Bruges, the masterful way that she uses and describes Bruges in Niccolo Rising. I love all the Malta stuff. Malta's a fantastic place with its own extremely rich history, and she taps into the history and the nature of the place. The poisoning of the Scottish commissioners, which I knew nothing about before. By the way, I'm extremely grateful that she chose the Lyman Chronicle that period, and she didn't talk about the general life of Mary Queen of Scots or Elizabeth I. That was really, or Henry VIII. That was really, really good pick as far as I was concerned. And also the character of Mary I, one of the most sympathetic portrayals of what was yet another woman in an absolute terrible position and a complete political bind. So I could go on, but you'll be grateful to know that I won't.
Please do go on if you'd like to. We've got time. Really?
No.
Okay, right. Was exaggerating. That was the last scheduled question, but I'm going to go on to one of my spare questions if needed. And actually it ties in quite well with what Sandra was saying there. So I'm going on to question 9, panel, just so that you know. Missing out 8 for the moment. Which of Dunnett's powerful women do you love and which do you hate? Linda?
Well, I never liked the Dame. She's a scheming, nasty, mean person. And I love her badness, but I don't like her. One of the ones that I like the best, I think, is Kate. Kate is, yet again, such a rounded person. You don't get a lot of Kate. If you actually look at how many issues there are, how many times she's there, you don't get a lot of her, but what you get is good, and you know her, and she's got a real strength, kindness, and understanding, and just seems to have a general love of humanity, but a very quick mind. Even though I read Ringcastle first, when I read Game of Kings, I wanted Lyman to get with Kate. I knew he wouldn't, but I wanted him to because they suited each other. So I think Kate, my favourite Dame. No, I don't like her.
Thank you very much. Simon?
Well, one character that I absolutely love to hate is Catherine Hunter, who is just a fantastic portrayal of a bitter, evil woman who has complete control over her rather useless son. I am. One of my regrets about the Lyman Chronicles is that neither of them appear later on. I'd love them to have popped up in Checkmate doing something absolutely vile. But alas, we can't all have what they want. So love, I'm going to pick, I might have picked Kate, but Marion. I think Marion, again, a woman in extremely difficult circumstances, beset on all sides, and has a much undeserved fate, shall we? I know there's people here who haven't read The House of Niccolo yet, so I'm going to pick those two.
Thank you very much. And Sarah, you were the one who raised the subject of powerful women in Dunnett. I thought you might like to go last, because you have a minute.
I've got as much as that.
2.
Right, okay. Sibylla is an interesting character. She's very charismatic. I really like her. Her actions at the end, or not actions, when it's revealed at the end that she's put Francis I first above her other children, soured me a bit. What soured me even more is when we met Rankin. Sorry, it's spoilers all round here, I do apologise, but when you meet Rankin in the, sort of like, especially in Gemini, and you think, why would you actually put him above your children? So that made me go more off her, but so what? Philippa I loved. Cathy I found annoying in a lot of ways. I think she tried to make Cathy too much there. Philippa was there more naturally, if you know what I mean. I don't hate them because I don't think they're evil, but Margaret Lennox with seducing Lyman. And then I think all of her antics was because she was as jealous as hell over, she was just very, very possessive over Lyman. And I dislike that. But the one person who, going back to whether she was underwritten, is the Dame de Dutonce. She's just a cipher. She's there and she moves people around and she manipulates people, but you don't get to know her as a person. And so I think if I'm looking for the most negative, powerful woman, I would have said it would have been her.
Right.
So
something tells me that Simon would like to say something.
So Dame Dutonce does exactly what she's supposed to do, and she is perfectly written for the role that she plays.
Indeed.
I didn't want to know anything really more about her. I don't care about her motivations or her upbringing. I did think at one point Ellis might turn out to be her, like 110 years old, but she's not. So that's that one. I just want to add a word on Marion, because she's not a conventional, if you think about powerful women, she's not a conventionally powerful woman, but she fights. She's in a position as a widow where probably most people expect her just to take a back seat and want another man to marry and hand over the business to him. She fights for her position in Bruges with all her rather considerable talents, and that is extremely admirable.
Thank you very much.
agree about
Please
Sibylla.
join me, before I say anything else, in thanking our panel for a fantastic session.